Howdy! Welcome to Railroad Adventures with Kendall. Today's adventure starts here in Pinedale, California, for we'll take a little trip on the old Minarets and Western Railroad. It's gonna be a fun adventure exploring the history of the finest lumber railroad in California. Operating from 1921 to 1933, the Minarets and Western was a lumber railroad owned by the Sugar Pine Lumber Company that connected the communities of Wishon, south end of Bass Lake, and Pinedale, where the lumber mill was located. Established in 1921 along with the Sugar Pine Lumber Company, lumber tracts were secured in the mountains above the Bass Lake area. There were other logging operations in the general area, including the Madera Sugar Pine, which, interesting enough, had its own logging railroad. This railroad is the forerunner to today's Yosemite Mountain Sugar Pine Railroad. Anyway, these operations had secured water rights and were using logging flumes to transport lumber to their distribution centers. So why go all the trouble and build a railroad? Well, a lumber flume is less expensive to build and operate, but needs a continuous source of water to operate. Also, water rights for the Sugar Pine Lumber Company were not secured to build a log flume for this venture, so a railroad was planned and built to transport the logs down to Pinedale. The large tracts of land holding these sugar pine trees were considered by many to be some of the best sugar pine forests in the world. So why sugar pine in this location? Well, sugar pine trees grow and thrive in the Cascade and Klamath regions of Oregon and in the Sierras and Yosemite regions of California. The region above Bass Lake borders the southern boundary of Yosemite. Sugar pine trees grow large, averaging 200 feet tall branch top to bottom with large limbs roughly 60 feet long. Sugar pine is categorized as a soft wood, but actually are a very hard pine wood. The grain is straight and the wood is generally not free. In its heyday, sugar pine was used for building homes and most public buildings, such as churches, as well as furniture, desks, and pews that were used inside them. In fact, the Madera Sugar Pine Company supplied 2 carloads of the best sugar pine in the world for Theodore Roosevelt's reconstruction of the White House. Almost all sugar pine lumber is still produced in California. Because the tree is so valuable, the whole tree is used for lumber products. Construction started in the spring of 1922 with 4 separate aspects of this lumber operation to be constructed at the same time. This included the sawmill complex on 574 acres of land near Fresno. This sawmill was considered to be the most high-tech lumber mill to be constructed at the time. The Minarets and Western connected the lumber mill to Bass Lake. The Sugar Pine Lumber Company's own logging railroad will operate from the Bass Lake Transfer Yard to the logging operations around Central Camp, and of course, the logging camp itself, called Central Camp, which was at an elevation of 5,335 feet. As a result of the sawmill, the town of Pinedale was created. We'll get more about this town in our regular Adventures with Kendall video. By April 1922, 2,000 men were employed, grading and building the line from both ends of this railroad. Over 4.6 miles of new railroad were constructed to connect with the Southern Pacific Line at Sect, which was later renamed to Pinedale Junction. So why pay Southern Pacific to use their line? Well, it would be cheaper and easier to operate rather than acquire property and build more railroad through the same area, which is something BNSF currently does with the Union Pacific Line through the Tehachapi's. Also, the lumber produced and sold from the Pinedale Mill will be ultimately distributed by the Southern Pacific's rails. Meanwhile, on the section above Friant, over 43 miles of new railroad were constructed on the Minarets and Western. The major work activity centered on the Sugar Pine Lumber Company route above Wishon. And on July 12, 1923, at 8 a.m., the first train, consisting of 16 log cars averaging of 7,500 board feet of lumber, arrived at the Pinedale sawmill. Now that we've learned the history of the Minarets and Western Railroad, let's take a trip to see what remains of this unique little logging railroad. As stated earlier, our journey begins at the former site of the Fresno Sugar Pine Lumberyard and Sawmill here at Pinedale, where there was a log pond to drop off the loads before the process of being made into fine lumber products would begin. And for the sake of our journey, let's pretend that we're an empty log train heading up into the Minarets region. Our train would have headed southeast on Alluvial Avenue and follows the street until the railroad makes a left turn towards what is now Fresno's River Park Shopping Center. Here, the railroad would have crossed Blackstone Avenue and would have kept going until it reached East Shepherd Avenue. Today, a section of this railroad is now a walking trail to the many homes along the way and is a great place to get exercise. Anyway, the railroad would continue on this path until it met East Shepherd Avenue and would follow the road until it met the intersection of East Shepherd and North Willow. It was here that the Minarets and Western would meet the Southern Pacific at a location called Pinedale Junction. Today, this spot is known as the Sugar Pine Trailhead. We're here at the site of Pinedale Junction, where the Minarets and Western would have met the Southern Pacific before proceeding northward to Friant. This is also the spot where they transferred their lumber load with the SP, who would head south to Clovis on the Friant branch. Anyway, the Minarets and Western at this point just becomes the Friant branch, and we head north to Friant. Our first stop on our trip is the old station stop at El Prado. This is the site of El Prado. This was the transfer station for the San Joaquin and Eastern Railroad with the Southern Pacific's Friant branch. The Minarets and Western would have come through here on its way to Pinedale. After El Prado, the Southern Pacific's Friant branch keeps going north towards the namesake town. And on our trek, we came across a landmark from when this was an active railroad line. Over this creek, near Friant, stood a trestle. Southern Pacific and the Minarets and Western would have shared this bridge. After crossing the Dry Creek Trestle, the Friant branch keeps going into the town of Friant. Originally called Converse Ferry before Jones Ferry, Hentonville, and later Pulaski, Friant was the end of the line for the Southern Pacific line in the area. However, the Minarets and Western would keep going on a large steel trestle above the San Joaquin River. The location of this giant trestle would have been right in front of the Friant Dam. After crossing the San Joaquin River, the railroad would continue north, heading up into the foothills before reaching the Wishon Junction at Bass Lake. Now, it's worth pointing out that everything that you're about to see was thoroughly researched prior to the making of this episode. While there have been articles about this railroad before, we're pretty certain that what we're about to show you is pretty accurate to the route of the railroad. This included comparing locations in Google Maps with old maps of the Minarets and Western from that time. With that said, if you're on Road 211, you can see traces and bits of the railroad when it snaked its way through this beautiful area, including the former community of Bellevue, California, where it seems the current owners of this land have left an intriguing monument to this little railroad. Was this intentional? That we don't know. But let's continue on our journey on the old Minarets and Western Railroad. As we continue on Road 211 up into the foothills, we found another remnant of the railroad, which is this cutting. Currently a driveway, back in the 1920s, this cut was wide enough for the trains to pass through on their way to the Minarets area. And speaking of passing through, we're on our way to the next stop of the Minarets and Western on Hildreth Road. This is Birch. Judging by the size of the grade here, there might have been a small yard or passing siding for trains going to and from the Minarets area. Today, it's a small ranch road with beehives, but if you notice on this fence, some of the posts are made of old railroad ties. We're not certain, but we believe these ties came from the Minarets and Western Railroad. The next leg of our journey takes us on the North Fork Road, where we cross the Little Feingold Creek. Judging by this map, which shows the Minarets and Western passing through the area, we believe this was the spot of the Feingold Bridge that they used to cross this river, possibly in the same spot where the current Feingold Bridge now sits. As we continue on the North Fork Road, we'll see more of the railroad grade on our left side. This gives us an incredible view of the cutting that was made along the hills as the train headed its way towards the Bass Lake area. As you can see, it took a lot of digging and cutting to make a smooth path for the log trains to pass through on their way to Washon. After passing through those cuts, the railroad will continue north before getting closer to Washon. But before we get there, let's take a look at our last point of interest, which is, appropriately enough, Railroad Grade Road. On spots like this, it's almost easy to imagine when there were full log trains that had just departed Washaw Junction sneaking their way through this rugged country as they make their way down the line to Friant and eventually into Pinedale. Speaking of snaking around, we're almost there to the end of the line, the transfer yard here at Washon. Today, this spot is a popular boat launch here at Bass Lake. However, there was a little surprise waiting for us. We stumbled upon this monument dedicated to the Minarets and Western Railroad. This has been quite a find on our journey. At Washon, the Minarets and Western would meet the trackage of the Sugar Pine Lumber Company coming out of Central Camp, which includes crossing over the Bass Lake Dam. Today, you can walk on top of this dam that once had railroad tracks. I'm on the top of the Bass Lake Dam. Now imagine in the 1920s when the Sugar Pine Lumber Company's log trains from Central Camp crossing over this while meeting the Minarets and Western log trains that would head south here in Washon. And that was our exploration of the old Minarets and Western Railroad from Pinedale to Bass Lake, California. I hope you had a fun time learning the story of this little railroad. Like and subscribe, for we'll continue on this journey on the old Sugar Pine Lumber Company's tracks into Central Camp. But until then, see you later, folks, and may your gifts bless the world.